Thank you for taking the time to get here from wherever you're coming from and to participate in this conversation. Just excited to be able to share this time together, especially as we have a guest speaker today. We're thrilled to have Ariam MOGOS with us today to present. Ariam is a Pan-African constructivist educator, passionate about computing, culture, play, and liberation. She's currently a lecturer and futurist fellow at the Stanford D.school K-12 lab, where she designs resources with K-12 educators around how to engage, evaluate, and create with emerging technologies grounded in ethics and digital agency. Prior to the D.school, Ariam was learning lead for UNICEF's Office of Innovation and has also led strategy, research, and learning design for education technology initiatives of Asian Development Bank, the Kenyan government, US Department of State, and Global Kids. She also runs the School of Intercultural Computing, a global initiative focused on racial literacy, intercultural competence, and relationship building in the field of K-12 computer science education. So we're just thrilled to have you with us today, Ariam. Excited about this talk that you're going to present to us today, and especially as this relates to the work we've been doing and thinking about together in design and designing for today's age. So Ariam, welcome, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see it. Great. So thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with all of you and to share what I'm learning and what I'm making at the Stanford D.school with all the educators on this call. As Paul said, I'm a K-12 Futurist Fellow at the Stanford D.school in the K-12 lab, and this is a really collaborative space where we support students and educators to cultivate their creative confidence. And the project I'm working on currently is how to support educators and students engage with emerging technologies in a really accessible way. And when I say accessible and I talk about access, it's not necessarily making sure everyone has an iPad, but it's really about helping young people and educators access the foundational concepts to emerging technologies like AI and blockchain and the Internet of Things. And to really like de-jargonize the foundational concepts under these technologies so that everyone can participate in the creation of these technologies. So we'll get into that a little bit towards the end of the session. But just to give you a really quick background on the initiative and what we're working on at the D.school, you can learn more about that on our site, and I'll share that at the end of the session. So I really want to just start off about the moment that we're living in, which Paul referenced, which is like, we're really living through another civil rights movement, and students and educators are starting to re-examine history and social studies curriculum, which is wonderful and long overdue. And while we are seeing some transformations in these disciplines by centering the stories of non-dominant groups, and we're also seeing the increased visibility of initiatives like the Zin Education Project and the 1619 Project, what's interesting is that these conversations are taking place in our social studies and history classrooms and less so in our maker spaces and our tech classes. And it's important for us as STEM educators to really notice this and ask why. And a big part of that reason is that science and technology are often positioned as neutral and objective. And I think a lot of us on this call know that that's not true, but if we were to compare STEM and history and social studies, STEM is often positioned as more objective and neutral. But the reality is that there is a long history of discrimination embedded into technology. And I want to start by just giving a couple of quick examples. So just a few months ago, Robert Williams, a Black man living in Detroit, was wrongfully arrested because of facial recognition software. He was misidentified by an algorithm. And this is becoming more and more common amongst Black and Brown communities. We're seeing racism and sexism and other isms just generally becoming more visible in technology. Another example is in 2018, Amazon had to scrap an AI automated recruitment and hiring tool that was discriminating against women. And we've seen a lot of sort of gender bias in technology. But there are also older examples too. So in the 1960s, Polaroid, a company many of us know well, worked with the apartheid government of South Africa to develop a camera that actually boosted the flash of the film stock so that it could accurately render the tone of darker skinned people, which helped the apartheid government surveil the movement of Black and mixed race South Africans with which was called the dumb pass, which they were forced to carry. And they were complicit in this. And then just giving one last example, during World War II, IBM controlled a Polish subsidiary which leased these punch card machines to the Third Reich, which was used to isolate and process racial censuses of Jewish German citizens. So there's actually quite a long history of technology not only being designed to discriminate, but then also applied and used to discriminate. And it's like, it's very, very heavy for STEM educators to think about this and hear about this. Because I think, you know, if we're really in STEM and we're making and creating, that's really supposed to be joyful. So I understand this can be sort of heavy. So again, I think it's coming back to the point that science and technology are not neutral, no matter how much they might be positioned that way. And we have decades of evidence that show that. And you know, we as STEM educators really need to consider how are we cultivating the next generation of technologists and the type of innovations that they're going to put into the world. And right now, there are very few initiatives that equip K-12 students to identify the role that their own biases, their values, their identities, and their positionality in the world and their communities are going to play into the design of the technology that they create, or even how they might identify dominant perspectives in technologies that inflict harm. It's really important that we start to cultivate these skills in our students. And like I said, I think STEM education is about making, and it's fun and it's joyful, which is why this can be really uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable issue to tackle because it doesn't equate tech enthusiasm. This requires us to be really critical of the art of making and creating with technology. That doesn't mean we have to strip it of the joy, but it's just a certain dimension that we have to incorporate into our work as educators. So one thing we've been thinking about through this work at the D-School is how can we shape technology literacy or STEM literacy to really prioritize learning about discriminatory design and the influence of our own positionality on our creations? How can we help students develop these skills? So we've come up with a couple of strategies or sort of tenets to start this work. So the first is really to make sure we're prioritizing racial literacy and history in CS education, which is something we just don't touch. It sort of sits in the domain of history and social studies, and really we need to take more of an interdisciplinary approach. And that means acknowledging how white supremacy has been ingrained into technology, and recognizing that technology is not neutral and that can create harm, and that it's really reckless to kind of omit that history. So even helping our students learn about those examples, that's one way to start, so that they understand that as a technologist, as a creator, you have a big responsibility in your hands. And it's important to start asking yourself these specific questions, and to think about the role that that technology has played in our history. And part of this is understanding that whiteness has really been the default setting. One example, again, is that some of the first film stocks centered white skin tones. And then today we have technologies like facial recognition software, which centers white skin tones. And so helping students make that connection between the past and the present, and that them being conscientious, learning about this history and thinking about the way they design technology differently is going to be the only thing really that breaks this pattern. And we as K-12 administrators and educators, and also tech companies who are really investing in CS education and STEM education, we need to help support young people to examine the design and the harmful consequences of some of the discriminatory technologies. A second sort of tenet or approach is, reflecting and acting on our own biases as creators, which can be really hard. But it's a really crucial skill for young people to understand how bias is really embedded in code, in data, and in policy and other facets of technology. And really, it's about just asking some critical questions. So when students start making or tinkering or creating with technology, it's important for them to iteratively evaluate their creations and ask themselves questions like, am I creating this just based on my lived experience, and then I'm expecting other people who are really different than me to use it? Does it actually reflect their lived experience? Is that inclusive? Who's benefiting from the technology I'm designing? Who could be harmed or left out? Who else needs to be represented? If they're working with data sets, what stories are in this data set? What stories is this data set leaving out? When was this data set created? What was the historical context? So really thinking about these questions ahead of time, not after we've created something and put it out into the world, can make the biggest difference in terms of the technologies we create and the impact they have on certain people in society. And even thinking about the question, I can create this, but should I put it out into the world? I love that. I think Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park says, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And I think that's such an important and timely question for us to be asking ourselves, and that we can help young people to really think about. And then the third kind of question or sort of really important tenet that we're looking at is helping young people to recognize and make space for multiple perspectives. And this comes from the Colombian anthropologist Arturo Escobar, who really talks about this concept of pluriverse, which is defined as multiple ways of knowing and being and thinking that are rooted in different places and communities. And young people are really curious. They can be really inspired by different histories, natural systems, and different people in the world. And giving them the space and opportunity to be inspired by places and communities that are really different than them is important, because that can help shape design practices that will actually shift power dynamics in technology across race and gender and ability and culture, and really actually make our future technologies more equitable. And that means, really encouraging them, for example, to say they have a design challenge, and they're trying to tackle a really hyperlocal problem or project. That means working with someone really different who has a very different perspective and sees the world really differently, and having to work together. And you might not really understand that other person's perspective, and it might be really different than you, but learning to respect that and still find value in it is one place to start. So we've created a design methodology at the D.School where you can take different aspects of designing for technology, whether that's experiences or products or data or systems, and map the problem space of these different elements and think about the implications ahead of time before the prototype you're creating is released into the world. So we're currently iterating on this, but it's something we're thinking about to provide guidance to young designers. So now we are going to move into an actual hands-on activity to think about how we might do this. This is called Build a Bot, and this is all about AI assistants. So hopefully everyone here is probably familiar with AI assistants. They seem to be everywhere now. And essentially they are just virtual assistants or AI-powered assistants that help us with requests. So everyone's probably familiar with Siri. Also there's Alexa that's built by Amazon, which it works through smart speakers. And AI assistants are really everywhere. BMW and Honda have incorporated AI assistants into their cars. So cars now can be powered by AI assistants. And they really help us do a lot of different things. We can play music with them, we can turn the lights on, we can make grocery lists. They can be really helpful. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna just experiment with generating lines for our own AI assistants. And what this means is we're gonna step into the role of a technology designer. So Alexa and Siri are designed, right, by real people who design different aspects of these technologies. They design the experiences we have with these technologies. So if I were to ask Siri a question, Siri responds back to me, and that response is designed by someone. And now we're gonna step into that person's role and just have a little fun and experiment. So what we're gonna do, and I'm gonna put these instructions into the chat, is there's a folder, and you're gonna go into that folder, and you're gonna pick, you're gonna go to activity 1, and I'll put all these instructions into the chat, all the steps. You're gonna pick a red request card. And then, and the red request card is a request that might come from a person using Alexa or Siri, right? So they're making a request to you, and there's a couple of different ones. And then you, behind Siri or Alexa, right? You are the technology designer behind the scenes. You're gonna pick a response to that request card. So I put an example here. And you are actually going to pick from a pre-populated deck of amazing movie lines, like some of the best movie lines of all time, and just have fun with that. And that's basically the data set that you're gonna get to work with. And then you're gonna share out in your breakout groups, and then we're gonna come back together. So why don't we share some of what we came up with? So team by team or group by group, you can unmute yourselves, or you can put it in the chat. So just share the red card that you picked, and then 1 to 2 of your favorite lines that you picked that you would use to respond to a human being who's asking your voice assistant this question.
I'll go first. Okay, so my group, we chose the 1, 2, 3, 4. It was the 4th red card, which we couldn't figure out what it was saying. We were like, maybe it's a different language, stuff like that. So we chose that one. And then we chose the blue card, which said, not quite my tempo, from Whiplash. So, because we were like, we don't understand it. And then, hey, blank, are you there? Let's chat. We actually chose, sit your $5 ass down before I make change. So we thought that was, because it's an AI bot, so it's going to be a little like angry, like, how dare you? We're not chatting. I'm made for greater things. So those were the main ones we had. And then we had somewhat disagreements on some of the other red cards, but it was interesting.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to share?
We talked about, or one of the discussions we had was if the second card was chosen, hey blank, are you there? Let's chat. And then AI responded with the blue card, ET phone home, that there would potentially be a generation or a group of teenagers and kids who might not understand that response or the reference that it comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very true.
I've never seen the movie, so I don't understand it. Does that make me a teenager again?
It does. Welcome back, Chris. Welcome
Anybody else want to share? I can't see the chat.
Oh, there's a lot in the chat.
Okay.
Especially for the red card. Hey, what's your name?
Okay, so what we'll do is, well, that's great. So take one of the lines that you picked, and we're going to do this as a group, and think about the implications of the line you picked. What if these movie lines were actual responses that came out of Alexa or Siri? What would a user or a person say? What might they think? What would they feel? What might they do? If this is what actually came out of Siri or Alexa when they asked one of these questions. And we can have an open discussion. You can take yourself off mute, or you can put it in the chat. And you can respond to each other in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Well, I felt mine was, hey, what's your name? And my response was, boy, that escalated quickly. If Alexa would have responded that way, I would have felt like, wow, that's rude. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, my Alexa's talking to me right now, so I shouldn't have said her name. But she apologized. She said, sorry.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
I think in some contexts, a lot of these lines are are pretty wrong for the situation. Some of them could be funny. Like I know Siri has a lot of things you could ask them that's funny. Like you ask who let the dog out, it will respond who. Like just for funny. But I think in a majority of the sense, it's probably best that some of these not be, because you don't know who's going to take it the wrong way. It's probably just best to remain neutral, especially if it's for a worldwide thing like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Okay, so luckily our everyday bots are not using movie lines as their data sets to respond to us. And as a couple of you pointed out, they might not be appropriate. People might be really offended. And it's just some of these responses are not contextually appropriate. But the funny thing is the people who are hired to write the lines for AI assistants like Alexa and Siri actually have a background in screenwriting, in theater, in design, in writing character-driven dialogue, in language and wordplay, and conversation. And so the same people that are writing lines for movies or television or experience design or voice design are doing the same thing for the AI assistants we use every single day. And that's because these people are experts in how to engage us and draw us in to use these products. And so it's a really important skill. And these people are really creating experiences for us. And sometimes these experiences can be wonderful. We need a specific type of information quickly. And they give it to us quickly, and there's no confusion. But sometimes these experiences can really go wrong because the implications are not considered ahead of time. And I want to give you an example. So when we don't consider the implications of our design choices, there can be really harmful implications. And I want to show you just a little over a year ago, if someone said to Siri, hey Siri, you're a bitch. This is actually how, now my Siri is talking to me. This is how Siri would actually, they really are everywhere. This is how Siri would respond back. And Apple came under a lot of criticism for this. And then they had to really redesign, do all the voice design over for Siri. Because this then reinforces sexism and gender stereotypes when Siri is responding back with these type of responses. And all of these responses were design choices that were made by the technology designer. And this as educators, as STEM educators, is something that we can help our young people be equipped with to think about the implications of their design choices. So now we're going to do the same exercise, but we're going to create our own original lines. No more movie lines that we have to pick from like a pre-populated data set, but we're going to be thoughtful and intentional designers and do it ourselves. So the cool thing is we're going to have some guidance. So in that same folder, there is a doc called activity number 2. You're going to open that, that document, and you'll see that there's the same cards, but there's a second part of the card that gives you a pre-populated response and a have you thought about, which helps you consider potential responses and what might be harmful about these responses, and then some space to brainstorm and to reflect. And so we're going to take some time to do this work, to think about the implications that are provided for us for each different card, and then share in our breakout groups again, and then come back to the main room. Does that sound good? Great. Okay, and I'll put these instructions in the chat as well. But I think we can, let me put that in, and then I think we can go to breakout. And there's also an example that I put in case anyone was curious. In the folder, there's also an example for one of them to show you, like I did it, for example. And I put in my own reflection on a response I created, trying to be thoughtful about the implications. Okay, so I'm really curious. I heard snippets in the breakout rooms, but I'm curious to hear what the real responses sound like. So if you would, if you want to share your responses, feel free to unmute yourselves, share your request, and then the original response that you designed as a group or individually, please feel free to unmute yourselves or put it in the chat. And maybe also share why you designed this response. If you thought that, if you were motivated by the implication you saw on the card, if there was other implications you were motivated by, love to hear that.
So one I suggested after looking at it was, hey blank, are you there? Let's chat. And the first reviewed response is where AI says, sure, I've missed you. How was your day? And the implications that I discussed was about becoming socially attached to an AI assistant, and how the AI assistant, how could we have the AI assistant remind the user that it's not human? And then a response that I thought would be beneficial was just if AI responded with, hey, I am not capable of that action. And then saying, is there someone in your contact list that you would like me to call? And the reason why I had thought of that was just, well, I teach 3rd grade, but even for younger children, the amount of like verbal person-to-person conversations that they get to have, especially during distance learning, is really limited. So for AI to say that this is something that I can't do, or I'm not made to do, but I would like to connect you with someone who would be more personable and beneficial for you to talk to. It would just reconnect that the purpose of technology is to connect us from human to human and not separate us from human to human. So those were my thoughts.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. It's awesome.
As we were saying in our group, talking about the name of the AI, and that is because we were talking about, you know, how we were on this, like the third page of it, which is talking about giving it a gender neutral name. But then I feel like in that case, since names themselves are inherently a single culture, I mean, there are very few cross-cultural names, especially like if you think about like when immigrants come to the United States, a lot of times they change their names to become more Americanized. To just give it a name that is completely, even that it might be in English, or you might be able to change it to any other language, something like art for artificial intelligence, or arty if you want to do it like that. But even then, that brings up, well, that's still a name. Art is for Arthur. but trying to make sure we have thoughts like that of even our gender neutral names, we still have to think about those people who are from different cultures, who they're being left out because that's the name of the, I'm pretty sure Siri is used around the world. I'm pretty sure even in other languages, they still say, hey, Siri or Siri. So like things like that, we got to think about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? I can't see the chat.
What I just shared in the chat was that we had a similar conversation around names and culture. So we actually decided to go with a non-human name of bot.
Great. Thank you.
Well, I have a device in my classroom and I changed its name to Echo because that's one of the options. But trust me, there's been several times where I've completely forgotten the name and I couldn't remember just because it wasn't a name. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's an interesting, yeah, that's an interesting reflection to bring up. Because yeah, names hold weight. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've had to, I would go down the list with everything that started with the E and I could not remember until I had to call my assistant and ask her what was the name that, we were using. And that's that I've been using that device for a year or two. So yeah.
Oh, wow. Great. Thank you for sharing. So we only have a few minutes left and I know that—
I'm wondering, is it beneficial to—
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm wondering, is it beneficial to seek out a gender neutral name or even a name that's, or like even a not name? Is that even beneficial if the AI still has a voice that is reflective of being feminine or masculine?
So that's that's great that you're bringing that up. That's a different aspect. So that is one part of voice design. It's not a part of voice design that we got into. But yes, like what does that voice even sound like? Is it sound like a more masculine voice, feminine voice? Like what is that actually, how is that designed and delivered? So that's a fantastic question that you're asking. Yeah, thank you.
Further comment on that, I'm curious if having a non-human name might also make that piece of technology less desirable to use, if that makes sense. Like it might be boring to the user because it doesn't have those kinds of, it doesn't have as much personality.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good point. And I think it depends on the type of name you design. So if we think of like some of the Star Wars robots like R2-D2, if it's like a fun and clever name that has meaning, that's not human, I think it could potentially still work. But to your point, Heather, I think if it doesn't have any meaning and it's not fun, then I agree. I think it'll be harder to be engaged, which is why, again, the design part is so important, because at the end of the day, these are products designed by companies and they want people to be engaged, right? That's how they actually sell these devices. They need people to be engaged. So what you brought up and all the questions that were brought up are things that these designers are thinking about quite often. So I don't know if everyone got to look through all the cards, but these cards pretty much cover like the biggest issues with AI assistants, according to research, which really is social attachment. Like these are real issues. Like, so there's research that's shown that children are now talking to inanimate objects more, children who are using AI assistants in the home. So these issues are really real. So social attachment, gender and sexism stereotypes, gender neutrality, and cultural relevance, which you all brought up, which is great. So these cards are designed to really help us interrogate these issues and to think about them really differently. And essentially, it's really about design starting not with the user, which is a really popular motto, but really design starting with us and looking into ourselves and thinking about how the things that we design are going to really affect other people, and how that self-work requires us to just step up so that we can create designs for a more equitable world. And how we as STEM educators are empowered to do that. We have a role in the social justice space if we think about it a little bit differently. And that's it. I hope that this was fun. I hope that this was thought-provoking, and I'm going to put a link to the resource. So today we actually just went through one layer of this prototype. There's another layer that actually helps young people and educators think about the data that these bots use, and then also the rules and policies around privacy and ownership and security, which are other elements that aren't as explored or really exposed around AI assistance. So that's here, and I'm going to put this on the D.school website, and I'm going to put this in the chat.
Ariam, I want to just thank you so much for guiding us through this critical exploration today. I think that for many of us, these will be ideas and issues and conversations that will continue. And so thank you for sparking this conversation among us. We're excited to continue it. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, for taking the time to really examine these issues, both from a STEM education lens, from a participant in using these tools, as well as thinking about the design of them and how we can work together toward more critical and just design. So thank you again, Ariam, for joining us today and for guiding us. We appreciate it. And I just want to invite everybody to our next colloquium in November. We'll have some colleagues from the Exploratorium Tinkering Studio talking about deconstructing professional development and developing tinkering dispositions and practices. So again, thank you all so much for being here. And this was a lot of fun, and also, though, a very significant and very timely topic for us to be thinking about and to continue talking about. So thank you all, and have a wonderful evening and a wonderful rest of the week. Bye-bye.